The sun sagged low over the desert as Reese Mallory crossed the last stretch of his ranch. All morning he'd followed the strange tracks, soft, precise footprints that barely marked the ground. Apache tracks, he'd thought, but something about them felt different. When he rounded the corner of the barn, sweat dried instantly on his skin. There, tied to the split-rail fence with coarse rope cutting into her wrists, stood the Apache woman he had glimpsed once on the ridge weeks earlier. She didn't shrink from him or cry out. Her posture was straight, proud, as if the fence had borrowed its strength from her rather than the other way around. Her dark hair blew across her face, but her eyes, sharp, steady, unafraid, never left his. Before Reese could form a single question, she spoke with a voice that carried both challenge and warning. "Do whatever you want, cowboy." It wasn't fear. It wasn't surrender. It was something far more complicated, defiance wrapped in steel. Reese stepped closer, scanning her wrists, then the dust around her feet. Fresh prints, heavy boots, deep heel marks. The Rowley brothers, the realization hit him hard and fast. They had dragged her here. They wanted him to find her this way. They wanted trouble. "You're hurt," he said quietly. She didn't nod or deny it. "I've survived worse," she replied, though her knees trembled once before she forced them steady again. Reese cut the rope binding her. She stayed rigid, weighing him, unsure whether he was another enemy or the first safe moment she'd had in hours. When she finally stepped forward, she faltered and Reese caught her elbow, steadying her without gripping too hard. She allowed the help barely. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nalay." He guided her to the shade beside the barn, but she kept her gaze toward the horizon, alert to every sound. Far off, the faint thunder of hooves rolled across the desert. Reese stiffened. "The Rowleys were coming back. They expect me to hand you over," he said. Nalay turned to him, her voice low but sure. "They expect you to fear me." Reese shook his head. "Fear's not what I'm feeling." The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust rose beyond the gate. Nalay straightened despite the pain. "Then we will face them together." In that moment, Reese understood something with absolute clarity. This woman wasn't a threat left on his fence. She was a warning, a message, and maybe even a test. And the Rowley brothers were about to find out he didn't fail tests. Bart Rowley glared at the Apache woman who had stepped into the open, his hand still hovering near his gun. The last light of the dying sun stretched long shadows across the dirt, turning the barn wall into a canvas of silhouettes. Reese, Nalay, and the two brothers who had come looking for trouble. Clay swallowed hard and backed his horse a few steps, torn between blood loyalty and the fear rising in his throat. Bart, stubborn as ever, chose pride over sense. "She comes with us," Bart growled, jabbing a finger toward Nalay. "You think you can hide her? You think you can protect her from the law?" "There's no law in tying someone to a fence," Reese said, stepping forward, placing himself solidly between her and the brothers. Bart scoffed. "Says you. But the townsfolk ain't gonna lose sleep over an Apache woman going missing." Nalay's chin lifted a fraction. She was weak, but the fire in her eyes burned with a kind of unshakable dignity. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone was a challenge that Bart had no right to meet. "You fear what you don't understand," she said, her tone calm enough to rattle him more than any threat could. Clay tugged Bart's sleeve, voice trembling. "Let's just go, Bart. We did what we were supposed to. What we were supposed to?" Reese cut in sharply. "You think your father would want you stirring a war?" Clay froze, shame flickering in his features. Bart ignored him. "It ain't a war if it ends quick," Bart muttered. But even he didn't sound convinced. Reese eased his stance, not backing down, just settling in, ready. "You boys ride off right now and nobody gets hurt. But if you try to take her, you're crossing a line you won't come back from." Bart stared at Reese, then at Nalay, then into the dust spinning beneath his horse's hooves. He was calculating, not wisely, but stubbornly. The idea of backing down ate at him like poison. "You want to stand with her?" Bart said, pointing a shaky finger. "Fine, but when the rest of the valley finds out, don't come crying to us." Reese didn't blink. "I don't cry to bullies." That was the moment Bart snapped. His hand flew for his gun, but Reese's shot hit the dirt, inches from Bart's boot before the barrel. Even cleared leather. The crack of the bullet echoed off the barn, startling Clay's horse into rearing. Bart jerked back, pale with shock. "You fire that gun," Reese said coldly, "and you won't like how I answer." Clay finally managed to grab Bart's reins, dragging him away. "We're leaving!" Bart was shaking with a rage that had nowhere to go. He spat a final curse in the dust, then turned his horse. The brothers rode off into the dusk, fury trailing behind them like smoke. Nalé let out a slow breath, steady but weary. She met Reese's eyes, and without a word, he understood. The danger wasn't over. The Rowleys would return, and next time they wouldn't come with only words and bluffs. Night settled over the desert with a quiet that felt almost fragile, as if the land itself was listening. Reese and Nalé sat near the corral where the lantern light painted their faces in soft gold. The cattle murmured in their sleep, and distant coyotes called across the open plains. But neither of them moved or spoke at first. The weight of what had nearly happened hung between them, heavier than the heat of the day that still clung to the air. "You should rest," Reese said finally, his voice low. Nalé shook her head. The moonlight caught on the braids in her hair, giving her an almost otherworldly stillness. "I cannot. Not until you know why the Rowley men came after me. You should understand the danger." Reese watched her carefully. "I'm listening." "My people live beyond the ridge," she began, her gaze drifting toward the dark outline of the distant mountains. "That land is sacred to us. It has been our home since long before the first cattle rancher set foot here. But the Rowleys want that territory for themselves. They claim it is open land. My people say otherwise." Reese nodded grimly. He'd heard rumors, whispers of fights brewing on the borders, but he hadn't realized the Rowleys were bold enough to start kidnapping scouts. "They took me because they feared what I knew," Nalé continued, "and because they knew what would happen if you turned me over to the soldiers in town. My people would have taken it as a declaration of war." Reese felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He stared out across the dark yard, imagining the valley overtaken by fire, fear, and broken treaties. "So tying you to my fence was supposed to make me choose sides." Nalé turned her eyes back to his. "Yes, they believed you would choose your own." Reese shook his head. "A man doesn't have to choose between people who ain't done wrong." Before Nalé could respond, the thunder of hooves rolled across the ridge. Both of them stood instantly. A lantern swung wildly from a saddle as a lone rider descended the slope, Clay Rowley, pale and frantic. "Reese!" he shouted, breathless as he pulled into the yard. "You gotta help! Bart's lost his mind!" Reese stepped closer, muscles tightening. "What's he done?" Clay swallowed hard. "He's gathering men. He's gonna hit the Apache camp tonight." Nalé's breath caught, her eyes sharp with fear, but not for herself. Reese was already grabbing his saddle. "Then we're stopping him." Nalé touched his wrist, her voice steady but fierce. "If you ride with us, you stand with my people." Reese looked at her, calm and certain. "I already made my choice." The three of them swung into their saddles and raced into the moonlit desert, knowing the night ahead could change the fate of the whole valley.